Welcome to WVTC TV Network, capturing family moments in real time, bringing families closer together from the comforts of home. We are unleashing something different to the world. Start your subscription today for the low price of $4.99 per month or $55 annually. Go to www.wvtctvnetwork.com to sign up today. WVTC TV Network is streaming live on 8 different platforms. You can easily download the WVTC TV Network app on the Apple Store, Play Store, Roku, Fire TV, and more. Here at WVTC TV, we have access to movies that everyone can enjoy, including independent films, Sons of a Preacher and a Good Thing, Treasures of Life, the epic drama, The Passion of the Christ, and the box office hit Madagascar Escape to Africa. Remember, go to www.wvtctvnetwork.com and sign up today.
Good afternoon. I'm excited that you've joined me again on my porch, the Parson'S porch. Thanks for coming back to the porch for some great conversation, discussion, and hopefully some information, some motivation, and of course, our focus will also be some inspiration. This is the month of February, and we're spending time this month, of course, reflecting and attempting to see what lessons we can learn and take away from the people upon whose shoulders we now stand and peer back at their deeds and wonder about the source of their strength and tenacity. Well, I'm excited today to have someone who can definitely infuse and contribute a great deal to this particular conversation. We're talking today about the role of the Black church in shaping Black history. And we'll be talking about that throughout the month. I have a number of important and significant guests, and my guest today is Dr. Jeanette Wilson. And I'm excited to have Jeanette. She's a sister beloved. She's a powerful minister of the gospel, a proficient and effective practicing attorney when need be. And she's also a powerful and life-changing speaker, a social activist from her toes to the top of her head, I believe. She's really an important person. Her life has touched the lives of many important and powerful people. She is a tremendous research tool, whatever you need. Dr. Wilson really is an all-purpose sister. And if you don't have the information, hey, give her a holler. But we're glad to have her. And come on, welcome. I'm Dr. Jeanette Wilson. Today, we're glad to have you. Thank you for coming.
I'm going to take you around. I need this recording so I can make that my introduction everywhere I go. That sounds real good. I wish it were me.
Well, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to a wonderful discussion today. And just a heads up, you can look forward real soon to Dr. Wilson and Attorney Howard, her husband, having 2 impactful shows on this network. And I'm excited about that too. The Word on the Street and the Church and the Law, correct?
That's right.
So you look forward to that. She's going to be a blessing to the station. I didn't know that when I invited her, but I'm excited now that she's part of the WVTC family. And that's a great thing. So thinking about the role of the church and talking about it, I tell you, I really wanted to raise this subject because I am convicted that at this moment in history in our country, we need to be reminded of how important and how significant the voice the role and the impact of the Black church has been in our community over the long term. Matter of fact, pretty much since we landed on these shores from slave ships.
Well, I think that most people, they read the Bible and they don't see the Bible as really who we are. When I think about emancipation and the whole slavery, I go all the way back to Exodus as you do. And so when I look at several of our leaders that brought us through slavery and emancipation and Reconstruction, they were all preachers leading the movement. Harriet Tubman, everybody thought of her a great woman, but she could not have done what she did except that she had a faith in somebody bigger than the slave master. I mean, to go take people to freedom, then go back and get some more, and then get knocked out because you had a brain tumor of some kind, and still keep going. You had to have faith beyond your physical capacity to see. How do you see a route of freedom through trees, through a swamp? And so she was a preacher. Frederick Douglass, an AME Zion preacher. He wasn't just somebody that showed up on the scene that could talk. God gave him powerful messages out of slavery, but he was a preacher. The majority community, the white people, tried to say Frederick Douglass was at some Quaker rally that caused him to speak. He was a preacher when he got to the rally. I was just reading about Frederick Douglass and I got excited. And, so you see all of these people were preachers, prophets, not just entertaining. These were prophetic voices saying, this is how we're going to make it through slavery. This is how we can get out of this. This is how we're going to make it through Jim Crow. And it's exciting when you know your history.
Well, it is really exciting, and I think that's why it's so important that we have to emphasize, elevate, and value the historical precedents that we have, because our history, our efforts are all under attack. And I believe that what you have just exposed to us, basic and fundamental information for people who are into the history of African Americans in the United States. However, I don't think it's an accident that the spiritual animus and the spiritual wind that impacted and drove these people to become and to do what they did with the determination that they exhibited. You talked about Frederick Douglass, you mentioned Harriet Tubman, and of course, one of my heroes and the person I actually thank in retrospect for inspiring me to get involved was Henry Highland Garnett, another minister of the gospel in New York, who spoke at that Negro convention in Buffalo and had a very impactful speech and statement. And so he was one of the first historic preachers I had encountered who had the courage to be involved in the liberation and social activism movement from the pulpit. And my question was this, and it kind of trailed off a little bit, but this is my question. Is it possible that the information about their spiritual connection was not an omission because of forgetfulness, but that it is being omitted because maybe the people who write history in America didn't want us to understand that it was their spiritual connection that inspired their social activism?
Yeah.
Because the white church is bent on trying to make a distinct and separate thing for individual behavior as opposed to the collective behavior of a culture. And so many people have believed from the very beginning that the Black church is really kind of a replication or a caricature of the white church. I don't see it like that. I see it as a parallel religious experience that runs alongside of the white church, going in the same direction, but not making the same stops.
Well, I think the Black church has always had to cause people to understand the conditions that they were living in, and interpret for them these conditions, if they are oppressive, are not what God would have you to live in. And the Black church has had to make us uncomfortable with injustice. It was the Black church that said, I should be able to go wherever my money takes me. I should not have to ride. I grew up at a time when we had to ride in a colored car on the train. And as a child, I did not understand how it is when I got to the Mason-Dixie line, which was an imaginary line. When I got to Cairo, I had to leave the dining car coming from Chicago and go back to the colored car and eat my mother's chicken in a shoebox and chocolate cake or whatever. I didn't understand what public accommodations really meant, except I wanted to stay in the dining car. And as a child, they took my little happy self back. And so to my car, where we had nothing, we didn't get pillows like the white people did. It was the church that had to fight that institution. And but for preachers talking about God didn't anticipate us living like this. We didn't live like this in Africa or in the Caribbean. It is when we were placed in these oppressive situations that we were treated like we were not human. And so it's the Black church that had to identify for a people, this is not what God intended. This is not the way people should be treated. And this Black preacher, many of whom didn't necessarily could read the Bible themselves. They had it read to them until some fought to learn to read. And so all my life, I grew up the church as my anchor and the Bible as my direction. I could not follow white people telling me stuff.
Well, for people who want to do their research, and especially for a younger crowd, at what time in the course of Black history would you suggest that the Black church became preeminent in the struggle? Would you say it was in the 20s, the 30s, or the 40s? Did it begin in New York City? Did it begin in Detroit or Chicago or in the South? Or
it began in slavery. Wherever we were, the only place that we had was our church and our faith. Remember, the slaves created music to communicate with one plantation and another.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, if you are a history student,
how far back?
But at what point can you say that churches were not indirectly, but directly engaged in organizing, for instance, boycotts or purchasing property or demanding that their constituents, at what point in time did the preacher have enough courage or support to have a microphone or to be interviewed by a newspaper or be on a radio station and say, the people we preach to on Sunday deserve to be able to rent a house in the tenement, so they deserve to be able to buy food any place, or we deserve this. At what point were they able to speak out to the larger society as opposed to in brush arbors and just being militants among themselves?
Well, I think that the person that's done the most research on the Black church is Henry Louis Gates. He takes us all the way back to Frederick Douglass with him speaking out at these gatherings that many times the white church pulled people together.
Right.
He spoke about Frederick Douglass, about the indignities of slavery and how Black people were treated. So it started way back then. And it kind of grew as the church, as we began to form our own congregations, AME Zion, AMEs, African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Well, the 7 major
the Baptist churches,
black denominations. We used to refer to the black church as those 7 major denominations within the black church. Well, when people hear you say the black church, you know, most people don't have a reference.
They don't.
And they have no idea. They think you mean the church on the corner.
No.
They think you mean the storefront down the street. When we talk about the church role or the role of the black church in shaping black history, we're talking about 7 specific major denominations that have been historic, beginning with the end of slavery or just before slavery ended, the Episcopal, the African American Episcopal churches, the AME Zion churches, National Baptist USA Incorporated, the Church of God in Christ, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we talk about the black church, that's our reference, a frame of reference. There are a whole lot of other smaller denominations or groups that are offshoots of a lot. But one of the issues for even having to have this discussion is the division, the separation, and the racism of the country. There would have been no black church if they had made the black people go to the balcony, if they were unable to emote. And so as a result of it, there has been this distinction between churches in America, and it's no longer just a complexion distinction, it's really a moral distinction. Because what I see is that so much of our counterparts who also suggest that they are Christians are anti everything for any other individuals
other than white people
besides themselves. And my contention over the past few years has been that we're really suffering from what I and some other people have labeled a tremendous value gap, where there's a whole group of people who do not value the lives of some people as much as they value the lives of other people. Because if they did, it would be impossible to be comfortable with the way things are, or to want things to go back to the way they used to be, if you had the same value system.
Well, you think about Richard Allen did not immediately want to form the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He's in church and is relegated, as you say, to the balcony, could not speak. And if you shouted too loud, that was a problem because you had to have a certain level of their decorum in their church. And so, you know, when you look at the formation of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, it was a resistance to oppression. You cannot oppress my worship. Similarly, the National Baptists, as you know, they didn't start out National Baptists. They were with the regular Baptists, which is now Southern Baptists,
right,
as if everybody in the South is a part of that group. It's not. They have forced us to create denominations where we could worship our God freely, openly, and with integrity. And our people don't understand how we had to fight just to worship God. I mean, initially, you know, we were worshiping in the woods, and that's why the African drums became so significant to worship, because we didn't have instruments. We had our bodies, and we had these homemade drums that we communicated with each other. I look at Richard Allen, and then, you know, remember the church that President Obama went when the man killed the people during Bible study? That's a famous church.
Oh, absolutely.
The white people had burned way back in the day. And a minister from New York had to go. He left New York to go rebuild Mother Emanuel Baptist Church. So there's so many places that we see them. Here's a white man, almost 100 years later, is in that church killing people. That's the same church that had been burned to the ground. Mother Emanuel.
Well, it is a continuation of the kind of intimidation and anti-Christian actions and activities that have been apparently incited or tolerated by people who said they are our brothers and sister counterparts within the framework of the Christian church. And I'm glad you mentioned the establishment of the African American Episcopal Church, for instance. But there's still so many churches, and I'm wondering what has happened to the historic involvement or engagement, or on a truthful assessment, what has been the level of Black church engagement? Would you suggest in social activism, demanding social justice and social righteousness be distributed toward their constituents? Because it appears that a lot of people who are in church are just completely aloof or removed from everything that's going on outside the church. One of the things that I bemoan when I think of it is during the George Floyd protest around the country. I watched a lot of African-American televangelists and pastors who were on TV, and I watched some white pastors that I had assumed were conscientious and sensitive to the needs of all the communities, because they tended to have what I would call a pretty high percentile of African Americans in their congregation. And I watched all of those programs with just a scintilla of hope and anticipation that one of these ministers would say something about how awful it was to see a man murdered on TV by a majority member police person, and not a word. You could watch TV for months and months of religious programming and never know that there were millions of white people and thousands of Black people in the streets daily around the country. And now when we hear about it, they're called the riots. How history is whitewashed to make it appear that anytime we protest, it's anarchy or lawlessness. And yet we've just watched thousands of people be pardoned who assaulted the Capitol, threw feces against the wall in the offices of senators and Congress people, some who even helped to kill police officers who've just been pardoned. But it's the larger culture who forgave them, which again points back to the value system. But my question, I guess, is how do we reconcile this? And how do we explain still the silence of so many African-American churches about what is going on?
I think it has a lot to do with how these pastors really perceive the church. They see the church as a place where you go and entertain people. And if you look today, most of our churches will not discuss anything that has happened. It's separation of church and state. How you separate church and state? You're born with a birth certificate, you die with a death certificate. That's the state. But you talk about that. You never see, I've gone to several churches.
Well, Christians have to have a driver's license too, right?
You have to have
They got to have a marriage license.
You have to get a passport. Oh, that's state.
That's all state.
That's all state.
You got to pay your taxes.
You got to pay taxes.
Even church people.
And yeah, church people, they take money to pay these people in Washington to not do what you need them to do for you. They take money out of your little check so that you can have people elected to office that you don't talk to because of separation. Yet these very same pastors, I'm like, what do you think the church is for? The church is supposed to be the spokesperson to the people from God, not from the White House, not from the State House, not from City Hall. You don't need them to tell you what to think and what to say. And if you allow that, then you are succumbing to this state that wants to control the minds and hearts of people. And so I have watched, I thought it was maybe the seminaries are teaching them this. No, these people learn this stuff on their own.
Well, but I would suggest this.
The cemetery.
I
call it seminary.
A thought I had recently was this. I think it is absolutely amazing that there is probably no vocation in America you could train for from birth to old age and never have to discuss or learn the definition of racism. You can become a lawyer and never have a discussion on racism. You can become a teacher and never have a discussion on racism except maybe how to interview an African-American author during the month of February for Black History to your class. You can become anything you can lead this country and not know the definition or even ever have a conversation about racism. And so with that understanding, it's pretty easy to understand, I'm sorry, but I have to attribute some blame to the seminaries because the whole concept of morality is understanding the distinction between sin. And any people who say they are people of wisdom is Jesus and not a list of hints and tips about how to live. So wisdom is access to knowing the difference between good and evil. Mm-hmm. And that's the bottom line and baseline for the function of wisdom in our life. And so how do you have all of these moral leaders who can't call hatred for people based on their color a sin? And so that's a seminary issue because they don't say that racism is a sin.
Well, they don't even acknowledge racism exists. That's the first problem. And you have a Black church that will ignore racism as well. And it's not because they've been to seminary, it is because they believe that.
But the leaders of the Black church have been to seminary. Most of them now, we want to demand, when they come now, they got to have, we have headhunters for churches just like corporations.
They get a package, but they're not trained to fight on behalf of the people.
But isn't that the seminary fault?
Well,
if you go into a white seminary, most African-American preachers who go to Black seminaries, they got Black professors who've had Black experiences. And so I believe that the insensitivity to racism is not just based on ignorance, it's based on a callous arrogance.
You think it's intentional on the part of the seminary to not teach?
Absolutely. But why would you teach when you have 6 Southern Baptist Seminary presidents who no more than 2 years ago all met to agree they weren't going to change the name on a hall at a seminary in Nashville for a slave holder because he was still a good man. So the fact that he was a slave owner was no reason for them as Christians to take his name off of that. They didn't care how many Black students went to their school. So absolutely, I think it's intentional.
I just find it difficult to understand, how do people read the Bible in two different ways? How do you read Exodus and not see the parallels between Exodus and our slave history here? I just don't understand how you read Jeremiah and not see how people are living under oppression. And how do you read any of the prophets and not see some parallels to how we live today? And I know one seminary professor, Dr. Cohn, he talked about racism. He preached about it, and so did Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor. But you have to read his book or had access to him because he's not in every seminary.
Well, not in every seminary, not only that, but I would suggest that the majority of the generation of pastors and preachers who are giving leadership now to our churches are not even familiar with the two people you just mentioned. Because if you go to Southwestern Seminary, if you go to most of the seminaries that most of the people that we tend to admire and invite to our platform to talk about social action are people who have been completely, you talk about indoctrination, have been indoctrinated with a perspective of Western theology that does not take into account any African experiences at all.
And if you raise any questions, these seminaries, they will not pass you.
So then back to your question. You want to know if I thought it was the seminary's fault.
Yeah, you think it's a seminary star, but I don't understand how people that didn't go to seminary before, they had something in them. Frederick Douglass didn't go to seminary. Harriet Tubman, she didn't go to
I guess the
seminary.
issue is we don't have them here with us now. So what do we do now?
Well,
and how do we counteract it?
Well, you have to. I think we have to have, and you talked about it before, the school of the prophets. These people don't know how to read the Bible.
Yeah, but how do we explain to our audience that I go to a church or churches or the church that I go to have decided that Black history is not something we're going to discuss. Okay, you celebrate Black History Month at school, but you can go to many African-American churches and you don't know it's Black History Month.
No, and they don't know the history
of
their own church. If you go to, in February, you go to 10 Baptist churches, they don't know the Baptist church history, the Black Baptist versus Southern Baptist.
Well, that's Methodist or Church of God in Christ.
Church of God in Christ.
Well, and that really bugs me a lot because sometimes maybe when you look at the denominations, you also look at the level of social liberalism within the framework of the church. Now, the one church that began as a completely Black denomination and white people came to be a part of it and then split it is the most conservative church among Black churches. And that's the Kojic.
Yeah, Church of God in Christ.
White people were joining the Kojic church when they first discovered this whole Pentecostal dispensation.
Mm-hmm.
And they got with Kojic and they split in Los Angeles and to form the Assemblies of God. But the people
on Google Street.
Right. And so the people who have experienced racism at a very basic religious level are the ones who swear they're not going to talk about politics at all in their church, and it's pretty much the Kojic churches.
Because they have been programmed, and not just seminary, because they didn't go to seminary to get that information. We have been programmed as a broad spectrum of people to believe that everything you say about racism and white supremacy is somehow political. And there's separation between church and state. I've heard people tell me that. I ain't been to law school. So they just make up rules. And like now you see a president that makes up rules as he goes along and people don't know the difference. So they just, oh, well, the president said it. You know, we're in a very dangerous culture right now. And when there are no prophetic voices or very few prophetic voices in these churches, it's a danger because I go to church thinking I'm going to get what I don't get in the newspaper, I don't get on the radio, I'm going to get it in this place I call my faith institution.
Well, I would venture to say that the larger society, our susceptibility and vulnerability to the consumption of entertainment and the images of the larger culture as the paradigms of perfection that we ought to be trying to imitate has consumed us to the point where we don't understand that everything about us is being manipulated and managed. What we consume, the image, the entertainment we consume. Out of the top 100 movies they would say produced in this country, 2 were produced by Black movie producers, directors, and writers, and 98 by white. 98% of the music produced, the companies are run by white people. The news media
controlled by white people.
Controlled by white people. What stories become front page? What stories are the lead stories on every news show? It's not some decision that we make in our community. So we have people who are other than the people who are trying to interpret those people to the larger society. The images that people have of us in Japan or in China or in Russia or any place else are not images we put out because we don't make the movies.
I think that's why this television station becomes significant because we don't control our messages. We don't control our images of ourselves, and our children grow up wanting to. Now the new cartoon comes out of Japan and China, so that's what children are watching. We don't create any kind of images. Your daughter has her own show here, so that other Black children can see Black children producing. When you looked at the Art Linkletter, children say the darndest things. They were all white children. So you want to be like what you see. And part of the problem, I think, is we're not giving the positive images. We're not challenging the system.
Well, we don't challenge ourselves. I think our problem is that we are too soft on us, and we are not hard enough on the oppressors.
Okay.
Because I think we make a lot of excuses for us. We can make choices about what we want to watch. We can make informed decisions, and we have a whole lot of people
who
are informed
help them
people.
Make those decisions. See, people you can't be informed if you're not informed. You can't make an informed decision when you have no information. You don't know.
But we have people with a whole lot of acronyms behind their name attesting to the level of academic matriculation. And so the fact that you have all this education, should rightfully assume that you are an archive for some information.
Yeah, but what platform is that person that you're talking about? What platform do they have other than the
Well, they have classrooms, they have their peers, they have other socialites like themselves. They got they got all kind of platforms. They got social media with thousands of followers where they just sending memes to each other. I could just give you a million type platform.
I know you could, but the deal is.
And they are influential platforms because they are called influencers. They get perks because people said they are influencers.
You know what they want to influence?
But it's not what they want to influence.
Yeah,
what do they choose to influence?
Well, that's what they want to influence. And so my question to you is, how do you change them?
No, I can't change them. You got to
So you got to become an influencer?
Well, my question is,
what's your question?
How do we use history? Because our discussion today is about how did the Black church help shape history.
Every movement.
I can't fix that issue. My particular concern, Dr. Wilson, today is what Black history did to shape, and how do we impact? How do we get the message across that the Black church is as relevant or even more relevant today than it was then, as opposed to describing our circumstance? I'm more particularly concerned about what do we prescribe for our circumstance based on what we've learned from this historical precedent that we have, or do we just ignore history and act like
history tells
they didn't come?
History tells us that, one, we have to resist oppression. You have to recognize it, then you have to resist it, and then you have to do something about it. You can't just adjust to slavery, And so I think that as we look at our history, we have to look at those role models. What did they do? They spoke out against it. They wrote about it, and then they acted against it. Children in Birmingham, the Children's March, it wasn't grown people. It was children that faced those dogs in Birmingham for rights. And so we have to teach our children, you don't adjust to racism. You don't adjust to negativity, treating you like you're less than. That is not what our ancestors did. At least mine didn't.
Well, I agree with you on that issue.
I know.
I think one of our challenges is that we have a multitude of kids today and young people and parents who've made the assumption that mixed couples, integration has solved all of our problems, and that Obama meant the end of racism. I mean, combating that is one of our biggest challenges even now, because our kids would tell you in the capsule or the sheltered environment in which they operate, I ain't never had I ain't never experienced no racism, but they don't know that where they live, the books they have, the school they attend, everything is the result of them being given less than, marginalized, leftovers, or even leftover tax money.
But I think we have a duty to educate them. today, what do they call themselves? Millennials, after millennials, the Gen Zs, they don't think they have a future because
they don't think they have a culture either. They think they're just a world citizen.
Just think they're here. Well, now they're going to know in this climate, they will have a better understanding of who they are. And we have to help them through this moment. We have to teach them what they were not taught. They have grown up in a culture when Obama became president, they said everything is okay. Now they see it's not. And they're very frustrated.
Well,
they cannot succeed their parents. That's the reality. They're broker than their parents were. And the parents didn't have a lot, but they had a faith in God and they had a fight in them. These kids don't have. You know this. You looked at the emotional trauma that these children are suffering. I'm talking about teenagers, 30-year-old. You know, we didn't have that kind of trauma because we were busy fighting racism.
Well,
what you say?
I think it's been a good discussion. I don't invite people on to have discussions with, where I could agree with everything they say. The whole point is to have an exciting discussion.
You don't agree with me. I thought we agreed on everything.
Absolutely not. I just called you on the phone if I thought so.
That's okay.
Absolutely.
I'm on the porch.
That makes our conversations interesting and intriguing, and the need for a part two. No, the solutions I think are critical. Getting to the bottom of all of this is critical. There are just a whole lot of, I believe, unnecessary apologists for the current generation that I just completely agree with. I believe that every generation has obstacles and impediments that are designed specifically for that generation, that they are no worse than the people who came before them. It all depends on how spiritually, psychologically strong you are, and how are you going to deal with it. I mean, who's to tell me that the trauma of slavery or watching your mother whipped or beaten or sold is just as bad as what, or not as bad as what kids are dealing with today, or what kids are dealing with today is not is worse than what they had to deal with. So comparing the trauma.
Well, it's not comparing the trauma. It is, you are comparing.
Or the impact.
The impact of the trauma is different now because you don't have a faith-based group. These kids are growing up outside of any structure.
But it's a choice.
It's not their choice, it's their parents' choice.
Well, it's their choice too, because they choose to go to the movie, their parents don't choose. They choose to go to dances, their parents don't choose. They could choose to go to church, their parents don't have to choose.
They don't know where church is.
Well, they have an idea about what church is. Ask them what they think church is and see what they tell you.
We need to do that.
Well, that's not, because they're not my audience. So that's not your audience. But I come on Push to talk about it.
Well, you need to talk about it.
I'll be happy to.
There's a whole body of people that have never been church.
Well, I agree. There's a whole lot of old folk who never been to church.
I get it, but they gonna die soon. It's got these kids.
Well, they gonna die pretty soon too, not going to church.
All right.
Because they raised by grandmothers who never see. The whole idea that your grandmother or your mother went to church is a myth.
Well, it is a myth, but we have to.
It's been a myth since I've been at least 30. And I'm 80 years old almost.
My grandmothers went to church.
My grandmother. Ours, yours, but not all people.
I didn't say all people.
But we tend to believe that everybody's grandma went to church.
No, but more of us were in church.
But we got 35-year-old grandmamas now.
I get it.
Well, but they ain't been to church.
We had 26-year-old grandmothers.
But my point is that their parents didn't go. So it's not just the fact their parents didn't take them. Their parents' didn't take them.
I get it.
We've always had a large segment of people who didn't go to church. There was never a time when all black folk went to church.
But do you think it's more now than it was then?
No, I think it's less now than then.
That's what?
Going to church.
Yeah, I said that. And I'm saying to you.
But I think it's less all people going to church. Ain't no white people going either.
And what has happened to the church? When has the church stopped being the church? Let me ask you that.
Well, I'm not sure the church is yet the church. So it has never been the church yet.
Okay.
It's becoming the church, but it's never been what it should have been.
The church during Christ.
We never favored our picture.
the church, it becomes a church in the midst of crisis, then it goes back to the world.
Okay.
Do you agree with that?
No, ma'am,
No.
but I'll accept it.
Okay, we'll accept it. That's it's your show. You can.
No, that's just my truth.
It's your show.
Yes. But I'm so glad you came.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we're going to have you back too, because it was a great conversation, just as I thought. It would be, I think our history has a lot to inform us. It's going to make a huge difference when we start to elevate our history, when we start to reflect on the precedents of the past as a paradigm for future replication, when we can use what happened yesterday, when we can borrow ancient wisdom and use it for modern thought, then I'm convinced we're going to be much better people. We cannot ignore our history or obliterate our history. It was Chancellor Williams who suggested that when we forget our history, we die. Mm-hmm. And so we cannot ignore nor forget our history. I would recommend you this week that you read a book. You got a minute or two. I hope you check it out. We're going to put it up. So be sure to use, I'm going to recommend a book every week for you to read during Black History Month. This is my Porch weekly read recommendation, The Black Church and the African American Experience by C. Eric Lincoln and Lawrence H. Mamiya. Both of them are scholars I definitely respect and whose work I've read a number of times. So you make sure you read it during this Black History Month, and you're going to be a more informed person. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to seeing you next week with Dr. E.L. Branch, and you're going to be informed by him. He's an intellectual and a spiritized brother. So look forward to seeing you again on my porch. Come join me for some more conversation, and I'll have my own iced tea next week. So join me with yours. God bless you. Have a good afternoon. Thank you again, Dr. Wilson, my sister, my friend. Love you. Thank you for coming.
Go to your Apple or Google Play Store and download the WVTC Gospel Radio app today. You can also say, Alexa, play WVTC Radio Skills.
Would you like to play WVTC Radio Network?
Absolutely. Download it today.
Views made on the preceding program are not those of WVTC Radio, iNetworks Communications, or their financial supporters.
Winning victory through Christ, WVTC Allsip Chicago, and iNetworks Communication Station.